Meanwhile, we have a chance to, from a sort of oversight point of view, just check in on things when we hear about issues. And that's what our first two topics are for today. So one that I've heard a little about, just want to learn more about, is glass and glass recycling. So I'm going to ask people who are speaking to aim for a brief presentation, like 5 to 7 minutes, and then that should give everyone a chance to speak, and we'll have some time for a committee discussion as well. So
let me just ask a quick question, clarification. So the glass recycling and Bentwood heaters, are these at all moving us toward particular bills or particular legislation? I just want to frame
Sure.
it.
My
So
sense
I can
is,
get a sense.
in the first case, that we're just checking in. I don't know if there's, I said, what's the problem that we need to learn about, or is it a status? I don't know if we're going to propose any legislation related to either of these.
So the genesis of this wasn't someone thinking, oh, we need a bill. How did?
Right. Well,
like,
Senator
background?
Rogers brought it up,
Okay.
the issue, and so I said, okay, well, we'll allocate time to it, dig in, and get ourselves started.
And may I ask Senator Rogers the issue itself, what he sees, just to get a sense.
The issue
Yeah.
is, as I've long stated, glass is messing up the single stream, contaminating recyclables. Folks from my area should be just putting it in the landfill, it's inert. Instead, they have to truck it down to Chittenden County Solid Waste, and it's the heaviest stuff, and they get charged the tipping fee. So not only are we driving huge amounts of miles and burning fuel that we shouldn't be burning, but we're also having to pay the tipping fee, and then Chittenden County Solid Waste was illegally dumping it at the same time. So they're charging my folks what I see as an exorbitant rate to dump in the MRF, and they were illegally dumping the glass at the same time.
So you're trying to figure this out.
Well, there's other markets for glass. I think there's still serious flaws with our recycling law, and we are supposed to be doing stuff to help the planet. And
yeah, no, I was just
so
trying to get context.
I want to know what's going on, and then on the composting end of it, Chittenden County Solid Waste got a big grant from DEC to improve their composting facility, and from what I understand, they're now sending their compost to Maine, and there's a whole bunch of Vermont composters that could use that money that are actually composting here, and this company from Maine is literally stealing all the big accounts from the Vermont composters.
I see. Okay.
So it's a couple problems in the 148 when the way we're recycling.
So 148 is.
That's an old, that's
the
the act.
that's from
Okay.
before.
It's the recycling.
And Senator Brett, this is our last full week of morning committee?
Right. So I think my understanding is that Finance and Approach will start meeting daily at 10, but that leaves us a window open in the morning. We just have to define it on a daily basis, really, how much of that window we're going to use to work on the things we still have open, including all the bills that haven't come back from the House.
Yeah.
Right. So with that, thank you, Senator Rogers, for teeing it up. Mr. Brabant, would you like to join us at the table?
So I spaced out, and I thought this committee had a screen like House Natural does.
No,
So
we're.
I think you might want to get on David's sheets
We're
about
still in the
that.
Stone Age
Yes,
here.
we're.
Extra copy for
Why don't I give one to Mark?
To introduce myself for the record, my name is John Brabant. I'm the Regulatory Affairs Director for Vermonters for a Clean Environment. Previous to my engagement with VCE, I was, among other things, 25 years, I was a regulator at the Agency of Natural Resources, Hazardous Waste Program, and then later on in the Solid Waste Program and the Salvage Yard programs. So I'm here today just to kind of touch on the issue of glass recycling, or not, as I've titled it. I think there should be a question mark there. But in any event, Senator Rogers asked that I present to you all. And I'm going to also touch on the issues or get into a little bit about the issues associated with the Chittenden Solid Waste District Materials Recycling Facility, or MRF, and how they've conducted business over the last decade or more.
For people in the room, I'm having difficulty putting it on our website. I'll keep trying, so for the people sitting in the room, I'll be working on it.
Oh, the
The
today's
PowerPoint,
handout,
yeah.
okay.
And I apologize about that. So this is short notice, and I really slammed this together on tight time frame. So I will be preparing a report that gets into this in depth. So basically, my highlights are what I'll be presenting today. I'm sure this committee knows, I'm on page 2, what recycling is, but just in sum, it's taking something that would be otherwise a waste and destined for a landfill, and sorting it to some degree, cleaning it up, and sending it to markets for remanufacturing into new products. Page 3, glass recycling in Vermont and I think nationally that's a tough material to recycle historically, and the markets have been weak, continue to be weak. Although it's my understanding, actually, I spoke with a gentleman just yesterday from this up-and-coming company, Glavel, that hopes to build a facility in St. Albans, that they're looking to develop a market for us, making this foam glass material that would be both a drainage layer and an insulating layer under concrete slabs and those types of things, foundations. So as Senator Rogers more than teed up, and I think I really don't even have to present now because we're done, but I'll just go back over the same ground to some extent. Contamination is an issue. If you all remember when we started recycling in the state, we used to separate the various material types, the individual plastic types, clear glass from colored glass. Now we do the consolidation of all those streams to a single stream. I believe the Casella company calls it zero sort. But the result of that process, which has become necessary for haulers, has been to contaminate the end result, the incoming recyclables, with not only broken glass and glass, but the glass also gets contaminated, as does, we used to get good prices for white paper. That used to be the most valuable product 20 years ago when it was separately managed. Now that gets contaminated, as does all the paper product. Solid waste is regulated by the Agency of Natural Resources Solid Waste Management Program, and how do they determine marketability? And I'm basing this on my experience when I worked in the program, but also recent conversations I've had with program people and people outside of the program in the regulated community. And essentially, it's a shot in the dark. It's a gut call. Determinations have been made on the fly. I'm sure there's internal discussion, but they consult with trade publications and glass processors, yes. And then for the Vermont market, they'll consult with the MRF operators and material recycling facility operators, such as Casella and the Chittenden Solid Waste District. They do not have a standard for establishing marketability or recyclability of these materials.
Sorry, just to be clear, when you're saying they, you're referring to the agency?
The Agency of Natural Resources Solid Waste Program does not have a formal review process or standard. They tend, like I say, it's on the fly, and there are no measures. I know that one measure years back that we used to discuss internally was 110% of the cost of landfilling might be one measure, or when it exceeds the cost of landfilling, maybe that's when it's not considered recyclable for the region or the state. But in implementation, it has been my experience and understanding that there's heavy weight given to born out of conversations with Chittenden Solid Waste District. They are one of the largest, if not the largest, manager of recyclables in the state. They certainly cover most of the northern half of the state in terms of recycling materials from the various districts. So it makes sense that the solid waste program might consult with them. So if you continue on, there's a page, I don't have page numbers, acceptable uses for processed glass aggregate. So when the markets are weak and the glass recycling facilities are far away and far between, you might want to look at alternative uses, which is what my understanding has been done or attempted in Vermont, at least by the Chittenden Solid Waste District. They had a processing operation originally that was not as good as the one they have now. They process the glass once. They run it through this processing unit. They process it once, the first run, and then they process it through the second run. The idea being that they not only break the glass down into size particles that are usable as an aggregate in the construction and road building industry, but also to get what are considered contaminants out of that stream, predominantly plastics. The earlier processing unit that they operated up until, I believe, 2015 was not very effective at removing those contaminants. The policy that I only showed page 1 of, the acceptable usage of processed glass aggregate, that's an A&R solid waste program policy. As you can see, it was last revised in 2002. It's dated, to say the least, and it's, I will say, very poorly written, and it was a subject of much discussion when I was there and never got revised. Here we are today with this document that is, as a regulator and a former regulator, is a poor thing to use as a regulatory document. But in essence,
And I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chair, I just want to, and this is no insult to you, I'm just
Yes.
worried about time, because we
Yes.
just have until 9:45 on this, because some of us have to duck out at certain times today
Okay.
for different things. So I just, if that's
No, I was just
possible.
gonna say, we're not on a 7-minute pace here.
Okay, well, I'll speed her up.
Today's going to have to be maybe a bottom line kind of day.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yes.
Well, this is a very deep subject, and I
Okay,
know that
well,
the
so this is, you know,
witness numbers have increased since I.
the 45 minutes we have this morning isn't the last word. We're just trying to see what the
Okay, so I'm gonna fly then, and maybe if there are questions, you can
Right.
hit me up, okay?
Yep.
So, bottom line
Let's
is.
aim to be done by 9:20. Yeah.
Well, bottom line is that the markets are terrible.
Okay.
The marketability of this processed glass material is made even more difficult because it's contaminated. It contains more than the 1% contamination level. The Chittenden Solid Waste District has accepted this glass for a price that if it were to be landfilled, because it didn't meet the spec for contamination, the trucking and landfilling costs would exceed what they took in on the front end of their process. So what did the Chittenden District then do? And this could have gone on as far back as 2004. It's difficult to tell. But they decided that there's a third way. We can't recycle it, can't afford to landfill it, or we're not going to landfill it. For whatever set of reasons, they decided, Jen can fill you in on that. So they decided, they got a property in Williston, former landfill site, active landfill site that's now closed. And all the way on the back of the landfill, there's a brink, and they decided they're gonna dump the contaminated processed glass aggregate. It's full of plastic. And I've got samples for you all to view. Senators. And that's samples I took on Monday from the site. I tried to take representative samples. I went across, I dug it down, and but it's an amazingly large dump. This stuff, because it does not meet the exemption provided under the PGA, the Processed Glass Aggregate Exemption Policy, it is then regulated as solid waste. It must therefore go to a solid waste management facility that is certified. This is not one that's certified for disposal. It's only certified for post-closure. And by the way, this is outside of the landfill cell. It's the other side of the landfill access and maintenance road, and dumped again over a very steep bank. The volumes are huge. I would estimate many thousands of tons of glass, contaminated glass. I have some video here of what you see in the jars. So they were sent a notice of alleged violation. Really, the reason I'm here today is twofold. One, there's been rumors going around here that the Chittenden District has been downplaying the seriousness of this violation. It's really serious, and I'll briefly go over that. In your paperwork, you'll see the first page of the notice of alleged violation. Subsequent to that, you'll see copies of reporting forms. Under Vermont law, under Vermont criminal law, Title 13, if anyone is to verbally or in written form report to a state official or board, i.e. the Solid Waste Management Program, Secretary of Agency of Natural Resources, false information they know is false, that's a crime. It's called false claim. How did I learn this? When I was prosecuting criminal cases, solid waste cases with the AG's office, they turned me on to this. And we actually would review cases against that and decide whether we should pursue it civilly, criminally, or on both paths. We would also use that as a mechanism to settle for what we thought was necessary. I've then gone through the quarterly reports for the last 10 years. I got most of them, but on average they took in and dispensed of about 6,000 tons of glass a year, contaminated glass. They represented in their forms that it was used for local projects, and on occasion I would say it was made into PGA that was used for local projects. We know now that it was dumped over the embankment. When you calculate penalties for enforcement, there's a document that's called a penalty calculation matrix. That's my term. There may be a different title. And among other things, you calculate the avoided costs of doing business. If you calculate, and I'm not going to get into it because I'm out of time, but it's in your packet. If you calculate, at minimum, I was very conservative, using a 6,000 ton number. It actually ranges between 6,000 and 7,000 depending on the year. If you use a 6,000 ton number at $120 per ton disposal costs, that gets you to $420,000 it gets you to $7.2 million in avoided cost of disposal. Just the tax alone, which would be backed out of that, the Solid Waste Management Franchise Tax, the avoided solid waste management franchise tax, were just to go to a disposal facility, which it must go to because of its condition, is $420,000. So that all needs to be fed into the penalty calculation. I would dare say that is why it's at the Attorney General's office right now and not being handled by A&R. Why? Because A&R can only prosecute civilly, and they have a maximum penalty amount of $170,000 that they can pursue under Title 10, Chapter 2001, the enforcement statutes. So I'd like to go on more. I guess I can't, but I guess in conclusion, I want to say a couple things. One, A&R needs to get their act together and get a marketability procedure policy developed. They can work with Chittenden, they can work with Casella and all the other haulers, but they need to develop, maybe even in rule, but certainly in a formal policy document that is aired for public comment, that needs to be developed because they are all over the map. Nobody knows what the rules of the road are in terms of when there's a market and when there's not a market. The other piece is A&R should not be allowing, Chittenden continues to take glass. They have a long history of violating the law, and A&R should not be allowing them to take glass until they can prove conclusively ahead of time that that glass will either be used as PGA, that it meets the spec, or it will be going to a landfill. And then CSWD needs to be honest with itself and its customers. They act like a business, they are customers. They need to say to their customers, this is the case, we can't market it, therefore we need to charge whatever the cost is, the landfill, it's $120 or whatever it is. So that's my very rushed presentation, and I can take questions, and I will have a report for you soon.
All right, great. Well, that's very helpful. And only 20 minutes. You've gotten through most everything. So
Okay.
I know it's condensed, but it's enough for us to see the
Yeah.
lay of the land as you looked into it.
And I have photo documented and video documented the site for your edification, and I will get that to you as well.
It's on the website now.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, I'd like to invite up Mr. Austin to weigh in on this issue from your perspective over on the other side of the state there.
Is it warmed up up there?
Not much. So I had Austin, President Austin, Rogers for all our service. I appreciate you taking my testimony again. Some of you might question what my concern is with this illegal activity in this pile of glass that's being dumped down in Chittenden County. For me, I'm the largest solid waste hauler in the Northeast Kingdom. And when Act 148 came out, I realized right off there was no infrastructure for the hauling community in the Northeast Kingdom. It actually pitted us directly against the solid waste districts up there because they had a different system in place that was funded through a tax on haulers. So I immediately got a hold of Senator Rogers and I come down and testified on a bill back then. I believe it was F-208. And in my testimony, I begged you guys to remove glass from the recycle stream, among other things. One of the major reasons I was pushing to have it removed is because I had found a market in Canada that would buy this single stream material from me, buy it, if it did not contain glass, because glass contaminates everything in the single stream system. Act 148, if you go back,
That's a beginner solid waste question here. So in other words, when you have single stream, the glass breaks, and then you get fragments of glass throughout all the other material. That's the contamination problem.
yes.
Okay.
That's why they wouldn't buy it.
Yes, and it breaks down equipment because it turns to sand, it turns into fine pieces of material. And it's inert, it's really, it was feel-good legislation to say, well, we banned this many ton from the landfill, even though it was something that was not a hazardous material to be using in that fashion. So I knew right off that I had to figure something out for my customers and probably other haulers. And so I come down and started working on that and immediately figured out who was driving the train down here in Montclair, and that was CSWD. They were constantly having lunch with Kathy Jameson. They were lobbying in the hallway, and there's nothing discussed about solid waste or Act 148. They were not in the room. Break down to today's agenda. I was last on the agenda for some reason. Okay. No problem. I can go first. I don't care. So what that policy did was
The agenda
force.
switched because I figured you and Mr. Braven were articulating
Yeah.
the problem, so better to hear the problem first and let other people respond
No
after.
disrespect intended. I just, I'm not a politician. I'm not a lobbyist. I don't know how this all works. I'm just, start to figure it out. So last year, Senator Rogers worked with, we set up a committee at the Northeast Kingdom Solid Waste District that involved a handful of members from our district that met a half a dozen times to discuss specific problems Act 148 that our area and our district was having. And we proposed S-285, which contained a lot of provisions. And one of them was to remove glass from the recycle stream and add a deposit to it, to take that contamination out of there, to open up other markets for other areas. It come out of your committee favorable with that in it, and went over to that house, and that's when CSWD trained come out, and Jen herself testified line by line against the provisions in our bill, including the glass, which got removed. This was about 3 weeks before they got their violation for landfilling this glass. So if you ask me why I'm severely irritated about how this went down and why I'm here, is because this entity that says they're a municipality, that is the flagship entity for solid waste in the state, which you legislators listen to. In Jen's testimony in the House last year on S-285, every provision that she testified that their district didn't support was removed. The only one that they supported was letting facilities and haulers charge for recycling. And the only provision that lived through that was a 1-year delay in the organics collection, or a 2-year delay to the 2020, which she recommended. And that facilities could charge for recycling, but haulers couldn't.
Sure, and I know Pat's upset, and I respect everything, I respect him. I still want it to get too accusatory in this, you know,
Right.
that kind
I
of,
mean,
that's all.
So-
I know, but you're upset.
Yeah, no, and I actually, I'm not accusing or misstating anything. I actually would ask you guys to go to the record and follow these things. The point here is that this policy was being pushed by CSW. That is not disputed. That they wanted glass in this material. In July 1st, 2015, was with 14 when I testified, I said you cannot mandate all this material into a certain facility and not legislate what they can charge for it. They were charging $5 a ton for this material in 2014. 2015, July 1st, this law took effect that haulers had to pick up this material curbside. The only way to do that is single stream, which has to go to a MRF. They doubled their rates that day. They doubled their rates to $11 a ton. When this glass violation came out, when she testified in March on S-285, she also testified that they were increasing the cost of the material at the MRF from $11 a ton to $24 a ton. Sorry, they had gone up to, in that time frame, they had gone up to $21 a ton for everybody. And when she testified last year, she said because the cost of recycling spiking, we're increasing for material that goes to our facility from in-district, from Chittenden Solid Waste District, from $21 a ton to $25 a ton. And if it comes from any other district outside of our district, it's going from $11 a ton to $50 a ton. So I'm sitting here as a hauler going, you mandated this material in there because you've killed the market that I had, and now you're gonna double what you charge us. And so my first conversation was with Mike Marcotte, a Coventry Select Board member, and I asked them to impose a tax against Chittenden Solid Waste District garbage to fund our recycling system. And I think that's a real possibility. And I guess what really should, you know, to answer your question on if there should be any legislative changes or something you guys should propose, you should be really concerned about what's happened with the recycle stream. Because this law was put into play when China would take anything.
Right, no, that.
Okay,
Yeah.
including the garbage and the glass.
Right.
And people in the industry that are on the front lines of this were trying to tell you that this is a change that needs to happen. So now what's happening is there's policies put in place at the MRF that say if you come in with too much contamination, we're gonna fine you. So haulers are picking this material up that's full of trash and taking it to a disposal facility because they don't wanna pay the fine and the higher cost to drive it to the disposal facility. So we're not really meeting our goals any faster because of when you're cramming this contamination into the stream. Glass needs to be segregated out. It cannot be sorted in this fashion feasibly. And
So is the glass that comes through the bottle though, is that does that have a market?
so when glass goes through a bottle bill, it's segregated not just by material, but a lot of times by color,
Right.
which then makes it a valuable material that can be reused. We're taking that valuable material and contaminating everything else. You know, I believe it was in last year's, the bill that came out last year, there was a waiver to dispose of white paper, which was one of the valuable materials, which is contaminated by this glass. You know, I've gone to other states, I've asked them about, and everybody says we don't do glass, we don't do glass. I'm just thinking, and everybody was trying to push that, and now the people pushing that policy, I'm not accusing them, but the people pushing that policy were blatantly breaking the law and making my customers think that it was being reused. And that's a problem for me. That's a severe problem, and it's more of a problem that you guys put so much weight into what they need and what they say. Their compost facility is inundated with too much material, they can't expand it anymore. You give them a $500,000 grant. It probably had some match that had to come with it. They're the only district that can match it. You know, so we're private haulers are emptied out, and private companies are emptied out from this money, and the money comes from a tax that is imposed on the trash that, so I have to pick up somebody's trash and recycle at the same time, and I have to add costs to the trash to fund the tax on all the recycle system that goes on, whether it's right or not. And you guys really, really need to be careful about the policies going forward, because the same thing's gonna happen to organics. These facilities that are in place are not regulated on what they can charge, but it's the only place we can take it.
Yeah.
And you're cornering the market for certain companies that, I mean, you know.
I think your point's a really interesting one about the you probably need grant money, you could benefit from things, but there might be certain circumstances you can't match those dollars, that kind of thing, and we wanna make sure that you guys get those kinds of opportunities as well. And then I also wanna mention, I think we should definitely look into that. So it's one of the things, and I know this has been said over and over and again in this committee, and you're saying it also, the key thing to what you're saying, I think, Pat, is glass really needs to be taken out and separated. And that would really be a huge asset too.
Absolutely.
But
Because right now,
the heart of the problem from my perspective is that Pat and a whole bunch of people in wherever the stuff comes from to go to Chittenden County, which is northern, central Vermont, goes there. Chittenden County Solid Waste is charging per ton on glass is the heaviest thing in that stream.
Right.
So they're making money all the while they're illegally dumping it. And so, to me, it's a huge problem when I have advocated for people in the Northeast Kingdom to be able to landfill it. I mean, if we could do that, probably Casella could actually use it for coverage, their daily coverage. Instead, we're trucking it all the way to Chittenden County, who's making money that gets passed on to the customer because it's very heavy, and they're not doing what they said they were supposed to do, which is recycling.
So more recently, Rutland, Murph had to ask for,
because they're not, and they're not, because it's been contaminated.
Whatever reason, there's no market.
So Rutland did get permission to landfill some of the, not landfill, use it for road base and drainage and stuff, and I go to that landfill more than any other hauler. It works very well for that. But, you know, the agency is not willing to just give a blanket exemption for this type of thing because of constant lobbying from a certain industry, you know, or a certain area saying, no, don't do that, it's gonna open up this. You know, and to speak for the grants, I've spent $1 million setting up for Act 148. And I've always thought that I was a pretty good businessman and make some pretty good judgments. And after this glass situation went down, it was one of the dumbest investments I've made. I should have done what some of my competitors have done, which was nothing. You know, I bought a $100,000 baler to process this stuff, to bale it and be able to ship it to market. I was working on that market, and it all hinged upon glass being in this material. And I fought and fought every year. You guys have seen me here. I've been here many times, and apparently I lost.
S-285, as it left the Senate, does that address the issue?
As it left the Senate, it had glass going to the bottom of it. And it also had a lot of other, there was like 12 or 13 provisions which address a lot of the issues. What we're discussing here today is glass, so yes.
Okay, so we need to stop for now, not for the year, but just for now. Ken, so I'll ask you to get out 285 as it left the Senate, so we can look back at that. The other thing is, if you could write up a description of the problem as you see it and a proposed solution to it, not just for glass, but what you're seeing coming on organics, that would be helpful for the committee to be able to review and come back to.
Some of it might be in 285, but some of it might not.
Okay, great.
Thanks a lot, Pat, I really
And
appreciate
Senator
it.
Kissinger, just to follow up on your question about the composting, the fact that Chittenden County Solid Waste got that $500,000 grant, and I don't know the specifics on it, but we have people like Tom Gilbert, Black Dirt, Vermont Composters, all these compost companies in Vermont that are doing a good job that I think should be getting that money if Chittenden County Solid Waste is truly now contracted with this main company who's just coming in and taking it. And this main company, Tom Gilbert told me, just took over 7% of his supply line because they're coming in and gobbling up all the big stores.
So the compost one is enough of an issue. I think we'll take it out of the glass discussion and come back to it individually, because
Well, I
there's
just
more
want
to
to
figure
make sure that if Chittenden County Solid Waste gets to keep that grant, it's for the purpose that the grant was supposed to be addressing.
Mr. Kelley, can you join us at the table? Thank you for coming back in. So you've heard the general tenor of the conversation so far, which again is just a first conversation. We're not going to be getting to the bottom of stuff today. We're just trying to hear from different parties about how they see what's going on. And So we're putting things into our in basket. So if you can fill us in what you've heard and how the agencies and departments looking at the issue of
Sure.
glass.
Sure. Josh Kelley, Materials Management Section Chief for Agency of Natural Resources, DEC, Solid Waste Program. I guess I can start with glass. Glass is generally, there's a lot of statements that are true. It's a lower value recyclable. It was not going to China previously. There was a Northeast market for glass. At least I know the Casella was using through Strategic Materials, which is a bottle and other glass processor that sends glass for multiple different uses. Things such as bottle to bottle, things such as glass for insulation, fiberglass insulation, and then aggregates like paint filler, road construction uses, things like that. So one of Strategic's partners in Boston area that was making bottle-to-bottle glass closed down, and that really shuttered the market for that type of glass use. And when other markets shrink, it makes things of lower value kind of focused. They tend to come to the fore a little bit more. So even though, as I said, glass wasn't going to China, because global markets for recyclables dropped, that put a lot of pressure on glass. And you see municipalities around the country, there's a few who have abandoned collection of and recycled glass as a result. I'll stop there in case there's a question.
Sure. And so from what you're seeing in the marketplace, are you seeing issues that make you and your colleagues say we ought to be revisiting how the program works, or how the statutes drive the program, or our rules, or do we need to revise things to keep pace with the marketplace?
It's a good question. I think we're seeing glass starting to be, we've been working with our transportation agency, V-Trans, for a long time, trying to find uses for glass that are local. I mean, anytime we can use materials locally, then we are not so beholden to those international markets, even if those uses are aggregate uses. There is a perception that I recycle my salsa jar and it gets into another glass container. That's rarely the case. It's more common for it to be an aggregate use. But as you mentioned, for bottle-filled glass, it can go to higher and better uses. So it's something that we've been trying to support those markets for through dialogue, through conversation between A&R and V-Trans.
Is there a reason? I've been hearing about this discussion for years now.
Yeah.
What is making it so hard to get to yes?
On glass?
Yeah. With using crushed glass as an aggregate in a road bed, for instance.
If you think about how the MRFs work, they're using a loader to push the mixed recyclables onto a conveyor belt, and that goes over a disc screen. It's actually very similar to agricultural disc screens. You want to kind of think about spinning wheels, and the glass falls through first, and actually CSW speaks to this more. And so it comes off with actually a lot of the things that Mr. Brainman shows, like the toothbrushes or things that shouldn't be recycled come off with it. And then getting that sorted out takes a lot of any current kind of equipment. And then it needs to be crushed down to a certain size so that it's usable. And where we're hoping to go is to be able to use that as borrow sand. Borrow sand is a commodity, and if it can meet borrow sand spec, then there will be a lot more markets opening up. Again, even just local construction markets.
So I'm not familiar with that word. What is it?
Yeah, borrow sand, I believe, is when a quarry might separate out the larger rocks from the smaller ones and all the way down to the sand level aggregate. You've heard of 3/4 minus and different grades that quarries will sort to. Borrow sand is, I think it can be used in concrete, road mixes, things like that.
Okay, Senator Roberts.
So I'd just like to get to the heart of the issue that we're trying to discuss here, which is the illegal dumping in the fact that Chittenden County Solid Waste District was making money charging customers from around the state under a false pretense that that material was actually being recycled.
My awareness of that case is that it's with the AG's office, that it's being followed signed by the AG. We were separate from it, and I don't have any intimate knowledge of the case myself. That's about all I can tell you as far as I know.
Okay, but, so, I mean, with this going on, it's clear that there's not a market, yet people from northern Vermont still have to truck their glass to Chittenden County MRF and pay what I see as an exorbitant rate, largely based on the weight of that glass, and there's no market. So why isn't the agency addressing that issue? And I think the whole zero sort experiment is a failure because of the contamination. And you've been around me long enough to know that I've been fighting certain aspects of that recycling bill because they don't make sense. And my folks in the Northeast Kingdom should be putting that glass in the landfill that's in the Northeast Kingdom and avoiding the wear and tear on their equipment, the wear and tear on the roads, wasting fuel and bringing it to Chittenden County where they have to pay to get rid of it.
I mean, certainly, as we've discussed, glass is a lower value of other recyclables, no doubt. If it can be cleaned up, it can have margins. And so the debate is, what is its use? What do we require to be done with it? We don't require single stream recycling, but the state law does require that glass, like a wine bottle, be recycled, or a salsa jar, or a pasta jar. I think last session we did work on a waiver for mixed paper, kind of in reaction with you on reaction to the China markets. That material had been going to China, and so that was a direct sort of correlation there. I am aware of some legislation that's been discussed about changing the bans in state statute. You know, the Secretary's powers around those. There is a way to give the Secretary the power around releasing glass or other mandated recyclables. There's actually already a clause in statute that you can just add a number to. The banned materials are numbered in statute, so that's a simple way to do that.
Is there a discussion going on about allowing, for instance, the landfilling, separation out and landfilling of glass by haulers in the Northeast Kingdom where they're right next to Coventry, for instance, so?
You can't, I mean, currently we can't allow that because state law bans disposal of glass, so it's a regulated, it needs to be separated for recycling. In the kingdom, Pat was mentioning that the Northeast Kingdom District has its own network of collection sites. They do, and they collect glass separated so they can use it for aggregate uses. So that's, again, we don't regulate that it has to be single stream, but I do understand from hauler's perspective, when you haul from a business and you have to haul all these recyclables, the most straightforward way to do it is all in one, is single stream collection.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Kelley?
We're gonna talk about compost another day?
Yes, I think it's a bigger topic, and we're already.
That's something else, just for your information, that I wanna get to the bottom of the grant.
Yeah, happy to come back. And Kathy's out, she apologized, she's out traveling, so that's why she's not here.
Okay, great. So we'll put that on our list. We'll be meeting still next week, and we can come back to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite Ms. Holliday to join us at the table.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I also ask a colleague of mine, Josh Tyler, to
Sure.
speak with me?
You can pull up a second chair. Get the one next to Mr. Dillon or something like that.
So I was prepared today to come and talk about educating the committee about glass and how we process it at CSWD. There's been a lot of other conversations about an NOAB and things that Chittenden Solid Waste District is allegedly doing that we're not doing, and I don't want to really, I don't think this committee has time to get into that or address that. I think it's extremely inappropriate to be talking about a current notice of alleged violation. And we'll just say that we don't agree with it, and we're working through that with the state.
We're not set up, so I agree. I mean, I'm a little uncomfortable with all the allegations that have been mentioned. Senator Campion was pointing out the there's a legal process to sort it out. We are not that legal process. So I think we're aware that there's a notice of alleged violation, and we're not in a position, nor should we be trying to take testimony on that, other than to be aware of it.
But we are the committee of jurisdiction.
Right.
And we need to know what's going on, because as I've stated for years, and the agency has always pushed back on the changes that should be made to Act 148, and the agency and Chittenden County Solid Waste District have consistently pushed back against my moves to change it, when in fact, I had to work my tail off to get DEC to give our area waivers from moving to single stream, and it turns out that we're doing a far better job recycling than anybody that's doing single stream, because we don't have the contamination issues. And it's just, so from my perspective, it's just, there are changes that should be made, and we need to know what's going on.
Sure. And I think it'd be helpful for, from your point of view as a facility receiving so much of this material, can you just talk about how you process it and what is ending? I mean, I think part of looking forward, if the current rules don't support sort of a logical way of handling this material, there's a presumption built into that, then we ought to be aware of that and think about how the rules could be changed to keep up with a changing solid waste world.
And I would also like to just suggest that, I really appreciate the committee's interest in solid waste, and really happy that you've spent so much time on solid waste in the last few years. It's an important topic to me, obviously, and I think there's obviously more interest that we could have a much deeper dive, perhaps outside of the legislative session. I know the solid waste district managers have wanted to participate and educate more about it's a complicated system throughout the state, and a lot of things get said that are true in one part of the state may not be true in other parts of the state, and maybe come to some solutions to some of these hard problems that we do have. So anyway, so we built our materials recovery facility back in First, I want to have Josh introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Josh Tyler, project manager and staff engineer.
So Josh and I both work on the MARC program. Josh is the engineer and the technical person, and so I invited him in today because he knows a lot about the technical parts of the equipment and operations. And he's been working extremely hard in the last couple of years at marketing the glass, and he's really come a long ways in finding some outlets for our glass. So back in 1993, we built our MRF. As I've told this committee before, it was a dual stream at the time. We separated fiber from containers, and then in 2003 we changed it over to the single. We invested a couple $1 million and it went to single stream. Back in 1993, when we built the MRF, we also passed an ordinance requiring recyclables to be separated and recycled in Chittenden County. So we've had an ordinance in place, a mandatory recycling ordinance in place since 1993, 20 years before Act 148 came about, and have been accepting glass and marketing glass. We've never made any money on glass. Glass is a loser in terms of money, regardless of our tip fee. The cost to process it is a net zero or costs hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. We'll get into the process now. So why don't you take that?
Yeah, so the material comes in through different hauling people that bring it in. They dump it on our tip floor, we bring it up. First we remove cardboard, the next step is to crush the glass to get it out of the system so it doesn't beat our system up. It's one of the
Sorry
things
for
we
my
do.
ignorance. Tip floor, what is
Oh,
this?
sorry. So it's just a giant floor
It's
where
just
the
the-
trucks actually tip their loads
Okay,
up.
that's what
and-
it's called.
Yeah,
Tip.
yeah.
Okay,
it's what
thank
it's
you very
called.
much.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, everybody tips on our floor. It goes up a conveyor. We take the cardboard out initially, and then we break the glass to keep it from disrupting our system. It comes out. We have a primary cleanup system that we just upgraded in 2014 that separates it into 3 different fractions, 3/4 of an inch and below. That comes outside of our building. In 2015, we invested about $500,000 for a secondary cleanup system to replace the existing secondary system we had. So since 2003, we've been meeting A&R's requirements for PGA as far as the less than 1% deleterious material, which is the contamination piece. With the new system that we added in, it was our attempt to push even harder because there's the A&R standard, and then there's what V-Trans has, which is a little stricter. And so we knew that we were meeting that PGA standard from the regulatory part. We wanted to get it into the transportation piece, which the state has been working really hard, and V-Trans has been working really hard with us, you know, and trying to come to a solution. And we're going in a great direction. So we took a couple years to tweak it, but we got to a material that is actually, it's still at a net loss, but it's not a significant net loss, and this is what we are making now as our product. This is a coarse to medium sand, for the most part, that is less than 1% contamination, less than 5% of it is ceramics. And the bulk of the material that we find in here, that's the deleterious fraction, is shredded paper. But we crank out this, and we're working with a local quarry who blends it into a sub-base aggregate. So anything that goes underneath the road, anything that's, you know, your compactable layer, what we do is we ask them to put 5% of this in that. So every 100 pounds, 5 pounds of it's going to be this same piece, which replaces the sand fraction for them. They really like it because there's a cutoff in sand. You don't want fines. You don't want really fine clay stuff. You have to clean that out of the quarry. This doesn't have it. So that's why they like it. And we're trying to get it and move it, and then get A&R or V-Trans's, you know, concerted approval. Approval's not the right word. Get them to really promote it, I guess is what I'm trying to say, as far as projects that they have.
Is it an increased expense to use that material in road building?
Increased expense, the only,
I mean, is that what's holding it back? It's a little more pricey to blend that in?
it's actually probably a break even for the quarry because we're giving it to them we're paying for the trucking to get it to them and we're giving it to them. And they're working in, I've run tests between what that sub-base I was talking about with glass and without glass, and they're pretty much comparable as far as the integrity and the engineering properties of the material, which is one of the things the quarries require before they, you know, would accept it. We currently test quarterly, so every 3 months we go and we make sure we're meeting our standards. And V-Trans isn't actively promoting it, and until there's an endorsement of this material, I think we're going to be working with local towns and local construction companies to use this material as a sub-base. The town of Burlington has taken some of it and used it in some of their projects.
From the economic standpoint, we charge a tip fee at the MRF. We also pay Casella to process all of our materials. And so without a revenue source from the glass, it costs us money to be processing glass. We're not making money.
And what percentage of the total glass you receive gets to that refined state that you can ship it over to a quarry? Would you
Well, there's
imagine?
this phase
So
it comes through in these.
Comes out in 2 fractions, correct. It comes out in the coarse fraction and the fines.
This is the raw material that comes out before it goes through the system, and then it comes out in these 2 fractions.
And so what we do is, about 10% of what comes out is this, and we just run it back through to crush it again to get it to that. So roughly, ultimately 100% of the glass that comes through our facility will get to that piece right there.
So, to solutions, we totally agree with potentially getting glass out of the MRFs because of its wear and tear on the system and because it is difficult to market the end material. I think it's difficult to market glass in general, not necessarily just from MRFs. I believe you would find with the bottle bill material that glass is not a moneymaker either. However, it is an appropriate material to go through the bottle bill system because it is kept clean and they can separate the colors, and the clear glass is more valuable and therefore at least get some revenue from the third left. So in terms of the bottle bill, glass would be an area to expand the bottle bill with, certainly without hurting any of the MRFs or the recycling systems that are in place, which I know I've testified in the past about bottle bill expansion hurting the recycling systems because it would take valuable PET or aluminum out of the system, but we would welcome glass to come out of the system. If you want to look into it.
Senator Rogers.
So was the glass that was dumped that kind of glass, or did it meet the less than 1%
We
standard?
have been meeting this 1% standard since 2003 when
We initially
went
went
to
single
single
stream.
stream. We tested it.
And so why was the stuff dumped? There was just no
I don't
market
want
for
to
it at that
comment on
time?
that current NOID right now. We disagree with the NOID. It would take a lot of in-depth conversation, and I don't want to get into that.
Well, so just for the committee, it seems like the sample jars that Mr. Brabant brought in are dramatically different from the sample jars that the Waste District.
I want to also suggest and welcome you to visit our MRF after perhaps the legislative session and take a tour and see for yourself how it's processed and what comes out.
Okay.
It's different from shipping stuff.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're making some progress on getting some fraction off into road building. I've heard someone talk about using concrete. I don't know if we're finding other markets for it, but
The Sandboro market is a pretty exciting market, to tell you the truth. The one that Josh and I brought up, that's something we're moving towards that would give it value.
okay. So last question, or Senator McDonald.
Do I understand that glass is being loaded in trucks in your area and being sent to Chittenden County, and then being loaded in trucks in Chittenden County and sent back to your area?
No, I don't think so. It's being loaded in trucks and sent to the MRF for zero sort, and that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of, is so when our guys have to pay that $50 a ton tipping fee or whatever it is, that is largely based on the weight of glass. And what I've been saying for years is that it would be better for the earth if the glass that's coming from our area, the stuff that's not source separated, all our waste, all our recycling centers source separated, but there are still some entities that do the zero sort, so that stuff goes to Chittenden.
But did you suggest that Chittenden County was then taking this sorted glass and sending it to Cumberland?
No, what I was suggesting is that they were dumping it illegally in their own old landfill.
So for folks up your way that are getting bottle bill glass or just sorting their glass, are they still finding a profitable market for it, you know?
I'd have to check in with the solid waste district. I don't know if there's any profit anywhere. It's marketable, meaning you can get rid of it, but I don't think there's any value, any money in it.
Just ethics aside, wouldn't it just be cheaper to dump this stuff from your area, your landfill
That's
illegally,
what
rather
I'm-
than truck it there first?
That's what I'm
Is it
saying.
illegally done?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Great. So I appreciate everyone's patience. I know we had, we went over some, but it was still a compact, 1 hour was all we, so we will, committee will discuss it. We'll talk about what kind of follow-up testimony we want to take. Meanwhile, I'll ask you to get a copy of S-285 from last year as it passed the Senate, and we can look back at that, and refresh our memory on where we left it a year ago. And
Mr.
with
Brabant,
that-
tell us where he was gonna dispose of this?
That is not mine. That is what I brought right here. That's the much better aggregate from the Chittenden
Tell us where
district.
you're gonna dispose of that?
I think it needs to go to landfill because it's a solid waste. It doesn't
Where are
meet
you gonna
spec,
dispose of it?
despite what's said here.
Where are you gonna dispose of it?
I was gonna leave it right here and have you,
Enter it into the evidence.
This is not the Van Wyck Expressway.
All right, thank you. So we are going to